Hello, everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. Today, we're doing a box office preview for this upcoming weekend, which sees Inside Out 2 expected to have a pretty strong hold from week 1 to week 2 after having a massive opening weekend, well exceeding all projections by so-called industry experts, getting to almost $155 million just in the domestic market, getting close to $300 million when you factor into account the international sales. Those numbers now getting closer to $400 million after the Tuesday and Wednesday numbers get factored in. And remember, that is just going to be from the domestic take. The international numbers don't always get updated until Sunday when we get the estimates for the international for how it did over the course of the entire week, including and up into the end of the actual weekend itself. Add to that the fact that it is opening up into other markets this week and also in the subsequent coming weeks after. And you see to yourself, and hey, the question is no longer about whether will the film hit $1 billion, but how quickly will the film get to $1 billion. And I think that we'll probably end up seeing that happen over the course of the next few weeks if these kinds of holds especially continue to happen, especially when there's no other films really going up against this, right? The only competition the film really has going into this weekend is a film called The Bike Riders from Focus Features. Personally, I'm actually pretty excited for it because Jeff Nichols is a very talented director. Yes, he has definitely made some films that have been really, really good. Some films that I've not been as big a fan of. For instance, one of his last films, Midnight Special, was not nearly as good as I had hoped it to be, but films like Take Shelter, especially, or films like Mud, very, very good. So excited to see what he's able to do with the actors, especially that he has for that movie. But let's just be honest, that's an indie film. So that's going to be making indie type money, and therefore is not going to be able to hold a candle to the kind of money that is expected to come from Inside Out 2. That has a lot to do with the fact that it's gotten very positive reviews from audiences specifically, very good word of mouth. We all know that the critics' words don't really mean a darn thing in today's market anymore. Go ahead and look to films like the Super Mario Brothers movie and others where you had a little bit lower than expected audience ratings, and the film still ended up doing quite well because it is the audience that matters. And it turns out Inside Out 2 is going back to the well to give audiences something that they might actually want to see, and more importantly, something that they might actually want their kids to see, which is something that Disney has not really been prone to doing over the last several years with a lot of their political agendas being out in the forefront. But hey, glad and happy to hear, and kudos to the team behind Inside Out 2 for being able to finally make a movie that seems to return it to form. Now, this does not take away the fact that last year, Disney made no movies last year that made any money. Even the one outlier, which was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, when you actually use the math, theatrically, it did not make its money back. We could definitely argue that post-theatrical with PVOD, with VOD and things like that, maybe it made some money back there. But ultimately, when you take into account how much split you get in the international market, how much split you get from the domestic market, and also how much the actual costs for that movie are, and in addition to that, the fact that we're probably going to find out the film costs more than what even the initial projections were, because that has just been the state of Disney, especially when it comes to live action films. This is a good sign, right? This is Inside Out 2 giving them a lifeline. Now, does this mean that Disney is saved? As I mentioned last year, none of their films made any money. So they finally have a film that is on pace to not only break even, not only to make a fair amount of profit, but also to be a billion-dollar film, and also the first billion-dollar film in what will likely be a summer of $2 billion films coming from Disney directly, with the next one likely being Deadpool versus Wolverine. Sorry, Deadpool and Wolverine. I keep putting them against each other. Who knows? Maybe they will fight. They probably will fight. I think there's a trailer showing that very fact. But this weekend, it's all about Inside Out 2. So let's go ahead and dive into those numbers. And so as it says, Inside Out 2 from Box Office Theory, right now the projections are somewhere around $76 to $87 million. That is just from the domestic market. What that means is that we're expecting a drop in either the 40s percentage-wise or the low 50s. So this is a very, very good hold for a big film like this, right? A film that cost $200 million, had a massive opening weekend, especially compared to the initial projections for it. Dropping in that 50% or less range means that you are holding on to a huge portion of your audience, driving out more people who maybe sat back last weekend, who decided they wanted to wait maybe until the crowds were down a little bit more. And that is something that has not been very common with big budget Disney films. Most of the time when it comes to a big budget Disney film, whether it be Marvel or Star Wars, whatever it might be, you normally see catastrophic drops from week 1 to week 2. And in the past, Disney, especially through Marvel, were able to actually still continue to make money after the fact, because even with a massive 60, 70, 80% drop, because they made so much money in that opening weekend, typically in the past, they were able to still, eke out $800-900 million, maybe even $1 billion. Now, obviously, we know that failed to happen. That stopped happening, especially during COVID and in the aftermath of COVID, because they now started to not only struggle with their own streaming service, putting things up against themselves, but also continue to put out very bad product, right? They actually put some of their better films straight to Disney Plus, films like Soul, films like Luca, straight to Disney Plus, instead of putting those films out theatrically, and instead put out films like Black Widow, which were gosh awful, which were some of the most horrendous Marvel content that we had yet seen. And then, of course, all the things that they've been putting out on Disney Plus as far as their shows have basically told the likes of Captain Marvel, the likes of especially box office bombs like Black Widow and Eternals, etc., hold my beer. But I digress. Inside Out 2 is clearly a huge win for Disney. There is no way of spinning that whatsoever. The numbers speak for themselves, and the positive ratings, the positive word of mouth from fans, from the audience, is what is going to continue to drive this film forward going into the next several weeks. So again, kudos to them for having a strong projected hold here, according at least to Box Office Theory, even Box Office Pro, which again, there's some connections between these two, as the person who runs Box Office Theory used to work for Box Office Pro, so they likely use a similar methodology. Right now, their projections, though, are around $75 to $85 million, so we could still end up seeing the film maybe even exceed that. Remember, these are the projections. Last weekend, the projections were off by quite a bit. The highest end that either site had was around 115 million. The film did 154 when you get to the actual numbers that were being reported. So again, we're talking about very good numbers. Not to mention that, but also when you look at the daily numbers, the reason why we can pretty much confirm that this is the kind of hold that we're going to see for this movie, right? Some are saying, well, what if it ends up, dropping off of a cliff? Right now, there's no indication that that's going to happen. Positive word of mouth is one piece of evidence. The other is to actually look at the daily tracking. So if you go ahead and look at the Tuesday numbers, remember that Tuesdays are what we call discount Tuesdays, because most theaters have a discounted program where you can get a ticket for a discounted price. Maybe even they throw in a thing like you can get a cheaper popcorn and soft drink, right? So it's an incentive to bring people out to the theater. Imagine if they did that a bit more often. Maybe there's a financial side where they couldn't do that, but it does help to drive up the numbers quite a bit. So as you can see, compared to the previous day, their numbers actually went up 29%. That's right. So from their Monday numbers, which were already pretty good at $22.4 million, which was only a 43% drop from the previous Sunday numbers, in the Tuesday after, it actually went up 29%. It increased its amount. And again, a lot of that's because of the discounted Tuesday. And if you have a lot of families maybe waiting for that to be able to go to the theater and spend less money, it makes a lot of sense as to why we did see an increase of money like that. But still, that's around $6,400 per screen, per theater. And apparently, at least according to the likes of Tony over at Deadline, it says here it's headed for a Juneteenth box office record with near $30 million. And so you had the discounted tickets on Tuesday, but because Juneteenth in the United States is a federal holiday, and because there are a lot of places that are off, including schools, summer camp programs, things like that, that means that you're going to have kind of a similar effect that you might have on a Monday holiday, for instance. And so they're actually projecting the film to have reached close to $30 million. Now, as of the recording of this video, which is around 9 a.m. Eastern time on this Thursday, we don't have those numbers yet, but I would not be surprised. Based on the numbers that we're seeing, it seems very likely that that is going to be the case. So we'll have 2 days of increased growth in the box office for this film, and that's going into its second weekend. So not only do we have, as I mentioned, the positive word of mouth, but the box office numbers, the numbers themselves, the data is indicating this audience is not going away. They are continuing to show up, new people continuing to show up as well. And those numbers right now, there's no reason to think will also continue to go forward, right? Tony talked about the $29 million. Now he's going to talk about records and things like that. And I always say, yeah, please, spare me, Tony. All right. Because we all know that you're using numbers, not adjusting for inflation. There's no doubt that this is good. There's no doubt that post-pandemic, especially, this is very, very good for Inside Out. This is very, very good for Disney. This is very, very good for Pixar, all right? Objectively, that is true. When you start bringing in the record stuff, you really don't have to bring the record stuff in because you're then comparing apples and oranges a bit, because you're like, okay, a film that came out in 1995 doesn't have as high as a movie that came out in 2024. Okay, the value of the dollar has changed quite a bit. The average ticket price has also changed quite a bit. So it's not really fair to make those comparisons. Let's just go ahead and call a spade and say, hey, the film's doing really, really well. Let's compare it to things that came out this past year. this is absolutely one of the highest numbers that we're seeing for this year, right? For a Tuesday, especially for an animated film, but even for any film coming out this year, we've really not been seeing these numbers, right? Because there haven't been any real major hits this year so far, with maybe the exception of one or two here or there, and likely will be a couple more coming in the future. I'm looking at especially the next what was the Despicable Me film coming out. I think that film will probably do pretty well. Obviously, Deadpool Wolverine will do well too, but the fact still remains it is doing incredibly well. Again, that Tuesday number is very, very impressive. Do not be surprised if Disney puts their numbers out early. What's interesting is whenever a film is doing poorly, Disney usually can hold back on reporting their numbers because this is just what they do. When films are doing really well, though, they are going to be one of the first ones out there saying, oh yeah, look how great we did. So expect a good Juneteenth number. Looking at the worldwide numbers for the film, we can also see why this is a good sign. So let's say, again, let's assume that 30 million is actually true. That means that adding that 30 million, so right now, the total right here from thenumbers.com, this is only up until and including Tuesday's domestic. So this is not including the internationals for Monday and Tuesday. This is not including the Wednesday numbers, which are being projected at being around $30 million. So assuming that 30 million is right or close to right, that means that as of right now, at least with the domestic numbers put in, you're looking at $410 million as of this Thursday. You take into account what likely will be more money, even more money internationally, and you're talking about a film that's probably right now in real numbers close to $450 to $500 million globally, and that's before the end of its second weekend. So I think what we'll end up seeing most likely is by the end of this weekend, the film not only reaching 500 million, but potentially getting closer to 600 million or more by the end of this weekend. When you add in all those internationals and also the domestic. Remember, it's not just the holds coming from the international markets, the 30 or so markets it came out already in. The fact is, it's also still, it's going to be releasing in several other markets as well, right? Right now, $379 million is where it's currently standing, but look at some of these markets, all right? So right now, it is the 20th, so it comes out in Brazil today. Brazil, not a major market, but still one that will definitely be able to provide several $1 million more onto their totals, so that's going to be adding to its numbers. It gets released in communist China tomorrow. So that is also going to be numbers that adds in. Now, that's a fool's gold number because let's say it does $100 million in China. That's not really much of anything because of how little they get return on investment. But still, a country nonetheless that's going to be adding to those numbers. That's why we're probably going to see an increase and not a decrease in the hold between week 1 and week 2 internationally because it's adding on these countries in addition to potentially having strong holds in the countries it's already in. Czech Republic comes out in July there. Finland. Again, smaller markets here, but still markets nonetheless. Hong Kong, right? A bit of a larger market there, not coming out until July. Japan not coming out until August. As I've always mentioned with Japan, Japan's one of those weird ones where sometimes, even if it gets a delayed release, it can sometimes provide a lot of money. The fact this film's getting a lot of positive praise word of mouth means the chances of it probably performing well there are pretty strong. But again, how strong is strong? Probably, we could say $30 to $100 million, maybe. And again, that's just a complete estimate on my part because Japan is sometimes a very unpredictable animal. But still, that's still tens of millions of dollars that have to be taken into account. That's why we're going to see some strong holds down the line, not just because it's holding naturally in the countries it's already in, but also because some of the numbers you're getting every week are going to be new countries adding into the equations. Netherlands doesn't come out until July. New Zealand doesn't come out until next weekend there in the month of June. Yesterday we had Spain release. So again, some of these also we're not having the numbers yet. Italy came out yesterday, so we don't have those numbers yet. France came out yesterday. So we're going to see some pretty big numbers going into this weekend internationally for the opening weekend in those countries. So $600-700 million by the end of this weekend, pretty likely, I would say at this point, based off of where the numbers currently are and where they are tracking and where the money is coming in. Now, let's go ahead and make some projections right now. Let's say somehow the wheels fall off. There's no indication, by the way, that this is happening. I think that this is a very much worst case scenario, and I don't think that this is actually realistic at all. So $500 million. If it gets to $500 million by the end of this weekend, based off of the typical math, based on, again, the historical fact that in the first 2 weeks, most films make between 50 and 70% of their entire box office, that would mean a minimum of 714, a maximum of 1 billion. Now, obviously, I don't think that's what the case is going to be. Let's say maybe a top end is around $700 million. Maybe it gets higher than that. But if that isn't the case, if it gets to $700 million, okay, so this is going to be a pretty interesting weekend to look at, because my box office projections and my box office breakdown is going to be slightly delayed. I'll be on vacation this weekend, so I'll try and do what I can from the road, but obviously with kids, especially on the road, with family, etc., and that's a travel day for us, it's probably going to be a little delayed. More likely to get an article over at geeksygamers.com from me on that Sunday versus a video, but I will do my best to get something out to y'all. But this is going to be the number to look at. How close does the number 2 weekend get for Inside Out 2? Again, the 2s are too crazy here. So how close does it get to $700 million? Because if it gets to $700 million, guess what? The minimum projection then becomes $1 billion, with the maximum being $1.4 billion. Now, right now, where it's tracking, I would say $1 billion is pretty much guaranteed. Maybe $1 to $1.2 billion sounds about right to me based on the numbers that we're seeing. If it gets past $700 million by the end of this weekend, okay, now we're having an even further discussion about those end results. So if it gets 750, I would say this is maybe on the high side, maybe a little farther past the high side of potentiality, because again, those other countries, really, there's a lot of uncertainties with how much money is going to be going into it. Remember that there is the Euro Cup going on right now. I forget exactly where the Euro Cup is this year, but still, it's a lot of countries. They're going to have a lot of time and attention on those games, maybe not wanting to go see movies, so maybe those numbers get impacted. We all know, though, sometimes these things are very unpredictable. Sometimes they have an impact, sometimes they don't. But that would bring it to be around $1.5 billion being the high end of the projections, with it still being around $1 to $1.2, $1.3 at that point billion dollars. So let's say maybe we get to 650, right? So let's say $650 million. We're still getting minimum projection close to $1 billion, basically $1 billion being essentially guaranteed. That's why, as I said, based on the numbers as they are currently tracking, there is very little reason to believe that it's not going to be able to hit to $1 billion, okay? As far as profitability is concerned, what that would mean is that this movie, so let's say it does get to, because right now that's using live data, but let's say it does get to $700 million, okay? If it gets to $700 million, I'm sorry, I can't actually do that in this chart right here because this is using live data instead of anything else. It breaks it down also by domestic versus international ticket sales. But we love doing things live here on OMB Reviews, and so let's go ahead and pull up the good old traditional chart here that takes into account a 2.5 multiplier. So if we get to that number instead, all right, so let's say we get to a $700 million number. Let me see, got to add one more zero there. All right, so if we get to $700 million, according to this metric here, that would mean that the film had already gotten to $120 million in net gain profits. Again, that's based off of a break even of $500 million. That's based off of a total cost of $300 million. So obviously, if that total cost is a little bit higher, that could generally impact it. But again, we're talking about a situation where it's a very, very strong film for Disney right now. Remember that the actual split's not going to be that good because it is making a lot of money internationally and it gets so much less from the international market. But just in general, as a way of looking at it, why we are looking at numbers the way that we are, why the numbers are looking very, very good for them, ultimately it comes down to this. The film is being very successful. And because we only have Bike Riders coming out this weekend, and again, I have a ticket to go see it tonight, so hopefully everything works out so that I can see the film tonight because it looks pretty good, but that's not really going to provide much competition for the film itself. If we go to the release schedule of what the films are that are coming up, right now, Bike Riders, Exorcism, those are not going to have any type of competition. Now, just full disclosure, you all know, I think the whole argument for competition is a bit of a non-entity because if a film is really good, even if there is competition, even if there's another film that could take a similar audience demographic, if a person wants to see a movie, they're going to see a movie. They will go see both movies if they think both movies are worth going to see. So competition might have some impact, but I think that sometimes the overall impact is not nearly as prominent as some people try to make it out to be. That being said, for the sake of argument, we go to the weekend after, June 28th. We get Horizon, right? The Kevin Costner film, the beginning of that saga. That's not going to take away the kid audiences. Quiet Place Day 1, I'm excited for that one, but that's not going to take anyone away. Don't know anything about Janet Planet, but that's A24, so doubtful that it's kids' content. It's not until July 3rd you get Despicable Me 4, and by then, Disney will probably have already reached $1 billion with their film. I think the chances of Inside Out 2 getting to $1 billion by July 3rd are pretty high at this point. If not getting to $1 billion, getting pretty close to it. Now, I do think that because most of the audience seeing Inside Out 2 will have already seen that film, that means that they will actually be in a perfect position to be prepped to go see Despicable Me 4. So this could actually end up helping Despicable Me 4 coming out when it is, because yes, it's coming out the same time Inside Out 2 is in theaters, but the most people who have already wanted to go see it will probably have already gone to see it. And also Despicable Me 4 will have an advantage here with the 4th of July holiday as well. And I think both films will probably end up profiting from that. But let's just say, it's looking like a pretty good summer for some of these films, right? Inside Out 2, likely getting to $1 billion very, very soon. Despicable Me 4, some have said maybe that film gets to $1 billion. We'll have to wait and see what the opening weekend is, okay? Because the tracking right now for that is not looking as good as it was for Inside Out 2. And remember, Inside Out 2 was able to vastly outperform, right? Go crazy, crazy numbers there, of course, down the line. And we go, of course, to Box Office Theory to see what they were saying as far as the potentiality of success for Despicable Me. They had $61 to $74 million opening weekend. Now, if we have a similar offset, meaning a similar discrepancy between the projections and the final results, that would mean that, hey, Despicable Me 4 maybe has a chance at a $100 million domestic opening weekend. Maybe we'll see these numbers adjust in the wake of Inside Out 2. The last time that this chart was updated was the 13th, so we still have, obviously, some new data to be brought into account for that. But they're saying the domestic total will be somewhere between 262 and 326. I think that will probably end up being higher as well, because if the numbers continue on where they are currently right now with Inside Out 2, do not be surprised if Inside Out 2 is going to be able to get to $500 million in the domestic market. That is right now some number that is being thrown out there. And again, if it got $30 million, that would mean it's at 230 as of Wednesday. We can assume it's going to have a $20 to $30 million this Thursday. So we're looking at it getting, again, closer to 250, 260. By the end of the weekend, well over $300 million domestic. Yeah, $500 million becomes at least a possibility down the road. But yes, this video obviously very much heavy-handed towards Inside Out 2's numbers, but that is really the main thing going on at the box office right now. And I think it's important for us just to always be realistic with these numbers and always be honest with these numbers. It is a huge success for them. Now imagine if this film had only cost $80 to $100 million, their profit margins would be insane. That's the one thing I think, honestly, that's going to hold the film back from being as big of a hit, even if it does get to $1 billion. Let's say it's about a 50-50 split domestic-international. Okay, that means it's only getting 55% of $500 million and then only about 40% of that other $500 million. So again, that's still pretty good. Then you have to, of course, subtract the production cost of $200 million, the marketing cost, which could range anywhere between $100, $150 million, maybe more, depending on the film, depending on the amount of money they're spending. Right? Typical spend is about 0.5. You take about half the budget, add that on top of the actual budget. That's when you get your total cost. So usually budget times 1.5 gives you the total cost of the film, including marketing. But because of how much they spent on it, it's going to cut into their overall profit margins. Now, the film is doing so well, though, it's probably going to end up being okay. It's probably going to still end up making several $100 million in net gain profits. But you have to imagine, okay, how much more money could it have made had it not spent as much money? Because you really didn't need to, because we already know there's so many other studios that have been able to make high quality or as good quality films as what we have seen the high end of Pixar's existence being for much, much less. Makes you wonder. And obviously, it's good to make your money back. It's good to make profit, but you always want to be able to have enough return on investment to continue to be able to make for future projects. And so if they're not making another $200, $300 million in net profits to be able to pay for another film in the future, that's when we start talking about, okay, yeah, you made your money back. Yeah, you made some profits, but it could be better. Again, I don't think Inside Out 2 is going to necessarily have that problem because of how well it is doing. And some of the projections right now are insane. Again, possibility of getting to 1.2, 1.4 billion. It's kind of crazy when you think about where this film was and where Disney was prior to the opening weekend to the movie. But those are the numbers as they stand. Do you think Inside Out 2 is going to be able to make $1 billion? And if so, how quickly? As I said, at this point, I think it would be foolish to deny that it is going to hit $1 billion based on the numbers that we are seeing right now. How much do you think that the Euro Cup might be impacting those international numbers? Personally, I don't think that much. $140 million is what it made last weekend. Euro Cup was going on at that point. So obviously, we can think about how the countries that it is currently out in are giving it a lot of money. A lot of movies, a lot of countries rather, are going to be now adding into those totals, with yesterday being the 19th of June being a day it opened in certain countries, it opening in today in certain countries, this weekend, next weekend. So yeah, expect this film to have some pretty strong holds down the line, and expect this film to continue to add to its overall numbers. And I imagine that this final gain loss will probably get wiped out, if not by the end of the next 2 weeks. could even be earlier or a little bit later, but it's looking good for it, and there's no way to deny that. For those wondering and asking for updates on Bad Boys Ride or Die, that film also right now projected to do very, very well financially. However, as at least this point in the release of the film, it is still around, I think, a $40 million loss is what it had right there. I did try to update that in real time just to see what the actual current number is in case it had not updated. But the reason why that's always important to remind everybody of is because of the fact, again, only 55% cut studios get from the domestic total, 40% from internationals. But let me know your thoughts about this in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button. Loud out that fire button over on Odyssey. Smash the rumble button as well. Also, please make sure that you are subscribed to the channel. Make sure you have that bell notification turned on. That way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live on the channel. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Again, I'm going to be a little bit quiet on social media, a little bit quiet in this space. Won't be on Friday Night Tights, won't be on the Salty Saturday stream, and the box office video / article on Sunday will be either delayed, pushed back, or looking a little bit different depending on how things go because I will be traveling with family. So thank you all very much for y'all's time, attention, and understanding with that. You all amazing, beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed Thursday. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Patreon, Subscribe Star, Locals, and YouTube members who are at the Chosen of Valhalla level. Starting off with my Patreon supporters, Father Luca Illich, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, which is Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. To my Subscribe Star Chosen members, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, and also the K-Man, check him out at xtheboundaries.co, and a shout out also to my one Chosen of Valhalla YouTube member, Mr. Roy. Thank you again for being so much of a huge supporter of the channel. And to every one of my chosen members, if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, or if you want access to things like giveaways of Blu-rays, 4Ks, etc., and access to an exclusive podcast bonus material for members, check out the links in the video description below for all of those details. You guys are amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed month of the Sacred Heart, and as always, God bless.